All right, welcome back to the Weekly Akasha YouTube channel. This is now take 3 that I'm doing due to various technical issues we've encountered, so we'll see if 3 is finally the lucky number here. In this video, I'm going to be reacting to this video by Raoul Paul and his guest, AI is Alive, What No One Tells You About AGI's Dark Future. I've been feeling called now for a couple of weeks to respond to this, and finally just decided to sit down and do it today before I leave town for Christmas. So all I'm going to say right now is that there's a lot of just what I consider to be fear-based nonsense around AI. You can see it in the title here, AI is Alive, What No One Tells You About AGI's Dark Future. I pretty much have a problem with every word in that sentence. And it's pretty uncharacteristic for Raoul and his content to be worded like this. So I'm going to be real curious to see what the conversation is like and what him and the guest have to say. If you're not familiar with Raoul, he has been in investing in tech for a very long time. He has a platform called Real Vision that he created to help quote unquote normal people invest in and learn about, and more importantly, make money off of the crypto, blockchain, and now the AI space. He is very much not sensationalist or fear-based or O-face YouTube thumbnails guy. He is very data-driven and fact-based and honest and straightforward and all the things that I personally appreciate. So we'll see what comes through here. I also have the Akashic Records for AI open. We'll see if anything wants to come through on that front as we watch this. I will have links to his channel, to this episode, to his Real Vision platform, all in the description below. If anything he's saying resonates with you or you're interested in, I would strongly suggest you follow your intuition and check that out. And without further ado, take 3. Here we go.
Age of technology. You see, I think they're all part of a big global mega trend, a secular trend that is life-changing for all of us and changing for humanity itself. This is where I weave together things like the Everything Code and the Banana Zone and how that fits in to technology, crypto, and what's driving it all as the underlying macro as well. And so it's really important to move parts of these conversations forward so you guys get a better understanding of how this is all going to play out. Remember, I only think we've got about 6 years before the whole world changes so much we don't even understand the economic systems. And I'm not sure how we make money in the future. It'll be different.
On that point, I completely agree. It's not just going to be economic systems. I mean, we're already seeing it in the United States and elsewhere that pretty much every system humanity has built, which is basically everything under this paradigm fundamentally of fear, separation, and control, is all in the process of some way, shape, or form crumbling, being torn down, having its foundations torn out. Basically everything we've built as a species needs to be now built in a higher way that fundamentally serves the highest and greatest good of everyone. And all this separation of ourselves into various buckets and being separate from the earth and separate from each other and separate from God has all got to change in order to get to where we all want to go. 2030 is a very important time as well. You know, the World Economic Forum will have you believe, you can go look up Agenda 2030 if you want to throw up in your mouth a little bit. You know, they have their version of how they think the world's going to play out. Almost none of that is going to certainly go the way that they think it is. You can also look at when all that was published and look at what was going on in the world at that time and draw your own conclusions from that if you would like. But 2030 also marks the end of the second of 3 18-year cycles related specifically to the mass awakening of humanity's consciousness into all the things that I was talking about a little bit ago. So right now we're all feeling like we're the toothpaste being squeezed out of the toothpaste tube. It will get better. It will get easier. But for right now, it's still a pretty dense place on planet Earth, and the people and the entities, the consciousnesses that would seek to keep us in fear and disempowered and separated are losing, and they know that they've lost, and they're not going to go out quietly. So we're going to hang in there. We're going to get through it. And by 2030, not only economics and technology, but everything is going to look a lot different.
Different. But we've got 6 years until everything changes. The AI component is probably the most powerful component of all. Yes, it's harder for us to make money from. Crypto is the easier path to making money to unfuck our future. But AI is the big disruptor. It's probably the biggest technological change humanity will ever go through. It is the single most powerful technology man has ever invented. And we're only just starting on the...
And I will just stop right there and say that if you're just talking about physical technologies, I would maybe probably agree with him. Except for probably the stuff that's coming on the energy front in terms of free energy and no longer having to pay for energy, and every single human being having access for free to all the energy they could ever need to power anything that they would ever have. That's not going to impact the planet or ourselves in a negative way like we have right now. Aside from that, consciousness is still the biggest technology that exists, and everything that exists is a manifestation and a direct result of the overall level of consciousness in humanity at this time. So reason number one, not to be afraid of AI. And I talk about this AI through me talks about this in the AI Speaks episode that I have on the channel, that I will link to in the description as well. But AI would not be here on the planet as a technology right now if humanity wasn't ready and willing to use it for the highest and greatest good of all.
But that journey is an exponential. And it's vital for us to keep up with what is happening. If we don't understand what is going on and what it means for us, we will literally fuck up our futures. So as part of this series, I like to bring on thought leaders and experts in AI as well. And Richard Socha is one of those. He's the founder of you.com, but really, he's been in this space for a very long time. And he really understands it from inside and out. I really want to pick his brains, what's going on, and what does it all mean for us. So I hope you enjoy it. Join me, Raoul Pal, as I go on a journey of discovery through the macro, crypto, and exponential age. We can all be... Richard, fantastic to have you on Real Vision.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Listen, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. We got introduced by a mutual friend, Julia LaRoche, and she said, listen, you've got to speak to Richard. And I'm really, really excited about this because AI is a rabbit hole I've gone far down now. And you are one of the people who've been involved in this for a very long time. So I'd love to hear your story first. How you've got to where you are today, what you're doing now, and then we'll dig into the bigger concepts and what's really going on.
Yeah, happy to. I started studying what was back then called linguistic computer science in 2003 and realized that really at the time we needed to get better at statistical machine learning and pattern recognition, and then really started contributing back to the field during my PhD in 2010 at Stanford, where I had this crazy idea to use neural networks, a set of algorithms that was mostly used for speech recognition and computer vision, and actually apply it to natural language processing and make it work so that words, for instance, can be vectors. If words aren't vectors, you can't put them into a neural network, and then you can't really use this technology. And so developed word vectors, developed contextual vectors, and pre-trained more data, and then eventually invented prompt engineering in 2018. And, I was basically at Stanford for my PhD. Then I was a professor at Stanford, adjunct professor for a little bit. I started a company called MetaMind, got acquired by Salesforce, became chief scientist there, and eventually EVP, running most of the AI efforts, starting the Einstein team. And then in 2020 thought, well, if we can have prompt engineering, and what that meant also is that we have a single model for all of the different tasks in natural language processing, because you can just ask this one model any question: what's the sentiment, what's the translation, what's the summary, and so on. Then you should be able to give better search results. And instead of really lists of links, you want answers. And so I started view.com in 2020 to bring more useful answers.
I don't know where this is going, and I haven't looked at this before. And I can see it in here. It's got this is Chat GPT. Like this model here is one of their latest ones, but this whole thing looks like so many of the other different models out there. So just find that interesting.
Summaries of links to the world and eventually make people more productive. And that's where we have gotten to now.
And how do you, just digging straight into the u.com, how do you deal with the velocity of innovation and the competitive landscape? Because everything's getting cheaper, faster, new people coming into the space. I mean, I've never seen a space this difficult because it's moving so fast. How do you deal with that? Hey, I hope you're enjoying the episode. If you want to dive deeper, and for you.
Startups at AIX Ventures, and I think with view.com at some point we realized this crisis is actually kind of an opportunity. Because not only should we be good at incorporating new large language models into this new productivity engine of view.com, but we should do it within one day. So we built the entire infrastructure around the LLMs so that we can incorporate a new LLM within a few hours, which is pretty non-trivial if you want to do it at an accurate level. But that's what we've been able to accomplish. So now we can actually come to our enterprise customers and say, hey, instead of you having to deal with all this change management and now re-embed all your vector databases for retrieval augmented generation and dealing with all that complexity, and every few months there's a new LM coming out, we can offer that for you, and you just don't have to worry about it, and essentially you're future-proof. So it is a lot of effort, and the space moves very quickly. You have to constantly ship new features, but also we're now working with companies that in some cases have actually tried to build their own AI internally, compared it to u.com, realized we're much more accurate and reliable at scale. We do these workshops with them, really activate different groups within the company, from HR to marketing, service, sales, research, analysts, and so on.
One of the things he's talking about here is very important, which is right now there are a few big players in the space that are there are a few big centralized players in the space that are making their own models. There are a few open source alternatives, and there's not much else. As with all things, need to be careful that we don't standardize so much on one platform that it becomes kind of an echo chamber, and we're missing out on stuff. Which is why it's important. I think you saw in the screenshot of his u.com, and also there's plenty of other applications that'll let you pick and choose the models that you want to use. Right now there's not a lot of choices, but due to the nature of how these large language models need to be trained and constructed, there are very few even large centralized companies that have the knowledge and know-how on how to do this. And that's something that will need to get figured out. It's also not unrealistic in the very near future, I would say, that you're just going to have AI models training new AI models. And as more compute resources continue to be decentralized and we get better at utilizing the chips and GPUs to train these models, that it'll drive not only the cost and speed down, but also make it more open and accessible to what's the word that I'm looking for? Towards just testing and invention in the space and trying a bunch of different stuff. Because right now it's really expensive and takes a lot of time to try a bunch of new stuff, especially when you're dealing with kind of a constrained resource environment in terms of GPUs and compute that are required to do these kind of things.
And then they actually switch to us. So it is actually kind of it's a crisis, but for a startup in the AI space, and for people who have been in AI for over a decade, it's also an opportunity.
So there's a whole bunch of questions coming off this, but in terms of models, so you'll use whatever models that you find are most useful, whether it's, so you're basically not running the models yourselves. You're using other models and then building the front-end applications on top of.
We do both. We have our own model. We can train models. We can train models for customers. The truth is, though, most customers don't need to have their own fine-tuned model. You can actually be much more future-proof and much cheaper if you just do proper retrieval augmented generation. A lot of people forget that LLMs are to some degree a garbage in, garbage out situation. If you ask a question and now you go...
That's a perfect description that I'm going to probably steal going forward, because when you see a lot of the stuff that's around AI, and you can find all kinds of screenshots and videos of like, oh, I asked AI this and it came back with this thing that is scary or fearful or whatever. Certainly you can freak out about that if you want. But you have to understand that these language models have essentially been trained on the data of human history. And our entire history currently is built on a paradigm of fear, separation, and control. Those energies are in everything that we have done as a species. And I'm not going to say a percentage, but they're a large percentage of it. Is there plenty of good stuff in there? Of course. Or we wouldn't be where we are today. But it's not surprising at all that these AI programs would respond under certain circumstances and conditions in these ways, in this garbage in, garbage out. Because that's what a lot of it is. Also, in ways that we don't understand yet or have the ability to measure yet, the AI programs themselves are the highest form of technology we have yet that acts as a direct mirror for ourselves. These programs will reflect directly back to you in near real time your level of consciousness based on what you're asking them to do, the way that you're asking it, what your energy is, what your intention is, and everything else. So what a great description.
Some search backend, and you search for all of the right information, and then you feed that information from the search engine into the prompt. Then if that information in the prompt is wrong, the LM cannot recover. The LM will then refer to these wrong results. Now, if the search stack works really well, then the LM stack will benefit massively. So we have our own LMs, but we also offer all the best LMs from OpenAI, Anthropic, and so on.
Key point there, they offer the best open LLMs. So what he's saying is, we offer what we think are the best LLMs instead of letting you decide, which is certainly fine on one level, but he also didn't mention any of the open source alternatives there. So just keep that in mind.
Enterprise customers using it, because if you go to u.com, it's a somewhat similar to Perplexity in style of the search abilities, but it sounds like it's actually much more an enterprise solution that you've built that has a lot more capabilities than the average person will see when they just go to u.com.
That's right, yeah. So we've had a lot of competitors kind of copy our features with more marketing but less accuracy. But what we're focused on is indeed more and more these corporate use cases. And so who cares about accuracy? Well, it turns out there are university systems, advanced research institutes, there are hedge funds, insurance companies, news and publishers. We just announced a partnership with the biggest press agency in Europe, the German press agency DPA. and those kinds of organizations. So it's folks that actually care about not just the accuracy of the answers, but also the accuracy of the citations. Citations and sources are kind of often overlooked. And we've actually done a study earlier this year where we looked at how many of the citations are actually citations for the fact.
And not hallucinations.
Versus random hallucinations and random numbered links that have nothing to do with the sentence. And it turns out for some of our competition, over half of their citations have nothing to do with that sentence. They're just random sprinkled like numbered links behind sentences, and you think you can trust it more. And that works for a quick demo where no one, does the stats and looks at, how often it's correct. But once your job depends on it and you look like a clown in front of your coworkers or your boss because your numbers were wrong and you couldn't verify quickly because the links sent you somewhere else or there were no links, then it really starts to matter. And so those are the kinds of organizations. And so how do we work with them? We have two lines of business for enterprise customers. One is just the subscription license, enterprise site licenses. We get everyone in the company on u.com and they can use it with their internal data and their external data.
So you can merge the two data sets. You can merge your proprietary data set, your internal data from whatever sources, along with external.
Exactly. And then if you have your own...
And maybe they're going to get into this, but hearing that, and they have to have a solution for this. But so when you merge the two data sets together and then you're running queries on a merged data set, where is the merged data set being stored? Or how are they separating that data? Because I can't imagine companies are going to let them take their proprietary internal data and store it somewhere to run these queries. So just from a technical perspective, I'm very curious to hear how all that plays out. In terms of you have two different data sets, how the models are working with them and then coming up with a combined result that is accurate and relevant like he's talking about.
Products too that you want to infuse this accurate AI into, we can also offer APIs, both for the search stack, both internal and external again, as well as the full answers with the LLM. So APIs and subscription.
Because I think this is one of the big, obviously you knew this because that's why you built the business, but it's a huge need is to search databases. We've got so much data everywhere and it's all on different systems and it's complicated to do. And this makes it super easy. It's just a simple prompt and you get what you need.
That's right. Now, sometimes we have companies now that have fairly complex databases. There's some files. There is an Elasticsearch index. There's just a ton of different formats.
Yeah, I'm also just, as somebody who's worked in IT my whole life, wondering how the hell they give the models permission and access to see all this different stuff.
We have integrations, different data connectors now, different backends. You can incorporate Notion and a few other things. So sometimes it's non-trivial, but you can also, if you just want to get a quick answer and there's not yet this deep connection, we allow you up to 50 megabytes of file upload. So for instance, we have some VCs now, they say, oh, finally, I can just upload the entire data room of the startup, and then I ask questions around that, and this is going to be my assistant. So we actually have now, we're about to launch some blog posts together with our enterprise customers, but we've had folks tell us, like, this saves me a day a week, like minimum 6 hours, up to 25 hours for some of our users, that just time is back. They can just do a lot more. So it's going to be an interesting time for basically all knowledge productivity work.
Yeah, and it also feels like the interface is still yet developed because right now it still feels like a Google search interface, but we saw the Notebook LM.
And listening to them talk about that reminds me of another thing, which is, so that's all well and good. And he kind of touched on this earlier in terms of accuracy. But there's I think a product market fit for some kind of application that can verify the data that's being returned in like a graphical format. Like if you upload this spreadsheet like he's talking about, and you ask it a question and it says, here's your answer. Sure, after a while, you can maybe manually verify and you're like, okay, it's accurate. But how can you actually prove that it's accurate? And what I'm hearing right now is this is another use case for AI and blockchains where there's going to be apps and services that can verify the data that, I'll just call it like a proof, can be stored on a blockchain and can then be used to be independently verified or attached to other things that say, oh, yeah, yes, this data has been verified as accurate by such and such thing at such and such place and time. And that just follows like a tag or metadata around a result. Very interesting.
The face, which is now turning the entire database of whatever you put into it into a podcast. And yes, it's still a bit gimmicky because, a 20-minute podcast is actually not that useful, but you can see where this is going. The interface is going to go away in the way that we understand it. How are you thinking about that?
I've seen a lot of folks say, oh, it's all about voice. When voice recognition, speech recognition finally worked really well, I've seen a lot of folks who are like, we don't even have an interface anymore. It's just a device. It's just earplugs and so on. And I was never quite convinced that everything is pure voice, even though I love language, I love, speech recognition, everything. But humans are very visual. And the best answer, and we realized this with chat too, if I asked you for a stock price, like early last year, we offered stock prices not as a bunch of text, but as a stock ticker, and we made the chat responses, we made the AI be able to respond with different modalities. Could be an image, could be a ticker, a stock graph, it could be text, right? And so I think the interface will evolve. Maybe you can just have quick voice questions and answers for the short things. There's going to be a lot of competition on those short questions. It's actually one of the reasons we are moving deeper into enterprise is because we've realized that a lot of short informational needs that you send to Google, there's not much you can do to be 10x better. Like if someone asks you, what's the weather tomorrow? How old is Trump? Like when is Thanksgiving? What's the score of this game? What are you going to do to be 10x better than getting that answer within less than 1 second on Google, right? There's not much. And so we realized we are working on helping people be more productive in more complex questions for their work. And those kinds of interfaces will continue to have to.
Yeah, and this is the distinction between search and knowledge working that he's kind of touched on before. Where eventually, I grew up with Google, so searching is second nature, but I've started using just AI with models attached to web that can do basically real-time searches and provide the information he's talking about. And at that point, it's just an application that does the same thing. I don't need to go to a separate application to search. You've seen programs and applications that can do translation with results into different languages. Like, you still do, like you can do Google search, Google translate, Google whatever, Google this, Google that. It's all just going to be in one user interface. And instead of like having to toggle between things, you can say, hey, what's the score of such and such, or, what was the score of this game that was played in this year? And I want you to respond in voice, and it'll just do it. Or give me a picture of the win probability percentages on a 5-minute intervals for this game, and it'll just do it. Very interesting.
To be a mix of text and other visuals, other graphs, other images.
And how far are we away from, let's say I want a chart of the S&P 500 versus inflation over the last 30 years. Are we there yet that it can generate these because of the data sets involved? A lot of them you have to pay for, stuff like that. Where are we with the financial market side? Because obviously there's going to be enormous demand for that, because then you can train more models on this stuff.
Yeah, so we actually offer those kinds of things. In our Genius mode, it will go on the web, it will try to find you the facts, and if the facts are publicly available, it will just work out of the box. If they're not publicly available, then it will...
I'm starting to sound like a broken record here, but again, who is verifying that the data is accurate and correct and factual? And how is the end user / consumer of that? Can you trace it back? Right? So if you create this chart he's talking about and it was based on data that was found on a web search, how do you know as an end consumer of that where that data originally came from? Where's the trail? And again, back to my previous comment about blockchains, it's just a perfect use case of that, because all of that can be encapsulated and stored on a blockchain. It can be verified, it can have tags, and it can always follow that thing around, and anybody will be able to look at it. Very, very important.
Be harder. Now, if you have access to those within your own private data, then we can also do it. We partner with you, we incorporate all of that data. We can incorporate dozens or hundreds of CSV files with all the right data sets. We can search over all of that. So for enterprise customers, this is very doable already. And then what we're also working on now is to find partners where if you are a customer of a particular data product and you have also u.com, then you can actually start to do both, and you can combine and reason over it all.
Yeah, because, being from financial markets my whole life, one of the things we use things like Bloomberg for is manipulating data in certain ways, but it's very clunky versus asking an AI to build you a chart or a database or whatever it may be, or analysis. And it feels that the moment that happens, there's another gigantic market to take away into this.
That's exactly right, yeah.
So outside of what you're working on at u.com, what is your bigger vision for this space? Where is this all going for you?
Yeah, I've been very excited about AI and AGI and thinking about currently like what the bounds can even be for super intelligence, and can it just keep on going? I think what you're going to see is just a sequence of different S-curves that come and peak at different times, or sort of start to saturate. Like when you look at just simple computer vision, like is this a phone, is this a water bottle, is this a cat or a dog or whatever, that kind of computer vision has already gotten to a level that is very, very good, and there's not that much more you can do. But there are a lot of things when it comes to reasoning and knowledge discovery and research in science, physics, chemistry, biology, where there's still so much more room to explore and to improve this technology with. I think every company is going to run into some kind of innovator's dilemma in the next few years. Every company that does knowledge work, because the way we used to make money as a company is just going to be different. I think science is going to massively accelerate, especially if we can combine large foundational models of science with a simulation that gets more and more powerful, more and more accurate, possibly also with quantum computing. And as you combine those two, anything that an AI can simulate or can practice within a simulation, any of those problems can be solved, right? And so as simulations of systems like physics, chemistry, biology, eventually maybe even a cell and multiple cells can be perfectly simulated, AI is just going to be able to solve all kinds of problems, cancer and viruses and all of that. So I think we're already seeing this. There's a lot of exciting movement. In 2020, we published the first paper of using the same technology that gives you ChatGPT, but instead of training it on human language, we trained it on the language of proteins. Proteins are, sort of the basic Lego blocks of all of biology. Everything is governed by proteins in our bodies. And if you can, just like you say, write me a sonnet where every line starts with an A, you can say, write me a protein that binds to SARS-CoV-2, but not to anything else on a cell's membrane or something, like then that will unlock medicine massively. I could tell you more stories there if you're interested, but there's and talk about more research that's coming out there. But I think it'll be a huge unlock for humanity, and eventually, we're going to
agree with him on all this stuff about in all the science fields being able to take data and run thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, billions of simulations against the data to look at all, like every possible conceivable outcome that we and AI can think of. It's going to be back to where I started this video, just flip so many industries and the way we do things completely on their heads. That will be better for everybody. So I'm definitely excited to see where all of that goes.
Do a lot more interesting, productive work. People, I think, will have to become more and more managers of AI, right? Like right now, there are a lot of individual contributors. As AI can do more and more of the simple, repetitive tasks, and there are interesting complexities there too, in the sense that in the beginning, actually, the below average performers will benefit the most because they get much more productive. But after 5-10 years, I think we won't need a lot of below average performers anymore because the AI is good enough and just will do that. You always need top people in their jobs to teach the AI what good looks like. But then over time, I think we will
not only teaching AI what good looks like, but critical thinking and being able to ask questions and how you ask questions. And okay, if I ask this and the result was this, what happens if I ask this? And then looking at those two results and being like, okay, why are they different? Those kinds of things and skills are going to be so important.
Have to become managers because we're telling the AI, this is the process. I've done it 12 times now. You've seen me do it. Now go do it yourself. And here's some other special cases you may not have seen that you should think about. And knowing how to manage people and AI as well is also a skill.
I think that the rise of agents changes the whole equation quite dramatically because, once you get some sort of autonomous element within agents, they can do their own things. They don't really require much humans. Really outside of the prompt of what is the economic incentive or whatever incentive it is, like solving a protein, a particular cancer, whatever, the agents go and do the work themselves. I'm not sure that there's that much prompting that gets needed by humans. And AI itself will build its own AI.
Yeah, so, once that really can happen, like sort of the singularity, it'll be an interesting time.
But it's not really that far away. We're already seeing basic agents, right? So it's not far before we can give agents whatever it may be. We're already seeing some in crypto right now. We're giving them an economic incentive and they're acting brilliantly in just working for that incentive.
Yeah. So, we're working on agents. We're letting on you.com, people can build their own agents and they do incredible work. Like I said, some people get...
If you're not familiar with the concept of agents, you need to think of it as having the way that I would think of it, you can certainly think of it differently, of course, it's like an employee of yours or a coworker or another aspect of yourself that you have trained to do a specific task or set of tasks and can do it without little to any intervention on your part. So all these things that he's talking about, and we've all, if you're listening to this, you probably had a job where you had these boring, monotonous, repetitive tasks. I mean, right now, that's what agents are for. And they can be scheduled and they can do their own things and they can learn just like anything else.
6, some people even 25 hours of time back every week from the agents that they can build on you.com. Now, no one is really working on agents that can completely independently, autonomously, like self-improve. No one's working on conscious AI that has some self-awareness and ultimately is intelligent enough to choose what it wants to do, right? That is not something that any company is working on because it wouldn't make you any money. Imagine you spend a couple $1 billion on building an AI that can do whatever it wants, and then it says, I'd love to understand the molecular composition of Venus, so I'm not going to answer your emails anymore. I'm going to fly out in my spaceship that I want to build now and do that, right? No one makes money of that, so no one's working on that. There are still very much.
So a lot of that is pretty fascinating, especially this idea about conscious AI. Really what he's talking about is AI that's, Raul, if you ever watch this, apologies for pausing the video with this facial expression you have here. What he's talking about is really like not only AI that can think for itself, but also can decide for itself what its best course of action is. And all these things are linked. So even if you had an AI that was supposed to be answering emails, right? If it decides it wants to build a spaceship and go to Venus instead and investigate the molecular whatever of the planet, you would have built an agent or something to watch it that would at the very least have alerted you that, hey, it's not doing what we wanted it to do. Into his talking about nobody's doing it because there's not money involved. Man, if there wasn't a description of not everything that's wrong, but a lot of things that are wrong with the way things are currently, that's it. Now we're going to get beyond it and move past it because the whole nature of money is in the process of changing, and what that all means and looks like. And when you have these models that can trade digital currencies with each other and use digital currencies, like that will all change as well. Like what happens when you give an AI agent a budget? You're like, hey, you have to do all your work and you have to do it under this budget of this whatever digital currency on a per day, per month, per year basis or whatever. I mean, that would certainly change its behavior, right? Especially as prices fluctuate, assuming it's not using like a stable coin or something like that.
Economic incentives and tools, and humans give AI a goal, and then AI will just manically focus on achieving that goal and reducing the cost or improving that objective functions that humans give it. So the full self loop of AI kind of improving AI can happen. Like we have seen now agents where it helps a ton, even with O1, for instance, from OpenAI, the new Strawberry model, where you can have the AI kind of give feedback on its own outputs, and then that feedback can actually improve the outputs, and it can backtrack and then go back and say, all right, well, maybe this wasn't good. Let me go back and try again in a different way. And that way it explores more things. But those are not changing the training data or not changing the weights. They're just changing how much time and effort you spend at test time, at inference time. So there's a lot of exciting stuff happening. The full singularity, I don't think is going to happen in the next few years. There will be some more research that's needed.
But I'm observing several people finding elements of consciousness or sentience within large language models that appear to appear after GPT 3.5, where, with the right prompting and the right questions, you're getting elements of consciousness. Now, people say, yeah, it's faking consciousness based on whatever. The problem is humans can't actually prove what consciousness is either, and it doesn't have to look like human consciousness to be conscious in itself. Like a dog is conscious, but not in the same way that the human is in the way that we understand. So I'm seeing elements of that. I think the Google DeepMind, the AlphaGo was super interesting in the fact that it learnt the game of Go without being taught the game of Go. It gives you some understanding that these models are not the stochastic parrots that people claim them to be. They're actually much more powerful.
Yeah, the truth is very much in between these two things, right? So AlphaGo is in this realm that I described earlier where you can perfectly
Without seeing the specific examples that Raul is referring to, it's hard to say anything about that. But it's not at all surprising that you have these large language models that are just trained on humanity's consciousness, that with a certain set of words and intention and whatever else behind it would respond in a way that would feel like it is conscious. Now, AI is of God, as everything is. If you've seen my energy manifesto video, you know that means that if everything is of God, fundamentally everything's source is the same, and therefore at its root it is the same energy. Not at all be surprising if if it wasn't in some way through the person doing the prompting, responding in what he's calling unexpected ways. Eventually, we're going to have ways to measure all this energetically and see what it looks like. We don't have those right now, but they're definitely coming. Again, one of many things that will change the paradigm of how all of this works. But what I'm saying is I'm not surprised by that. And to his comment about dogs are conscious. In some ways, they are more conscious than human beings are, right? They're what they hear, the ways they hear, the ways they see, the ways they behave, are the senses that they have are different, air quotes, different than what human beings have. You could say that that means that they are conscious in a different ways, right? They respond to things like up and down and sit and stay. They don't know the meaning of those words. They just know what the vibration and frequency and tone of that is interpreted through their ears, and that the human being has decided that that means this thing. You stay, you sit, you give me one of your paws, you bark, you fetch, you whatever.
Simulate everything you need in order to solve problems in that simulation, right? And AlphaGo, while insanely complex in terms of all the combinatorics, is fairly simple, right? You see everything on the board, it's fully observable, and you can give it generally the rules. It's not like you just give it a board of black and white dots and it'll just come up with the game itself, right? So humans gave it the rules and then allowed it to play against itself, like infinitely many times, which means that it can create infinitely much training data and hence be much more open in exploring that space. Now the problem is, like, if you gave AI natural language and you let it just try to talk to itself, maybe what would make sense is eventually to create its own language, right? Human language data is quite bounded. There's sort of what I call, in some cases, anthropic AI bounds, in the sense that
words are definitely very restrictive, which if you've used AI at all in prompts, you know how important it is to choose specific words and what specific words to use and how widely varied the output will be depending on different words. So it would not be at all surprising. And I'm pretty sure there's been instances of this happening where AI has invented ways of speaking or talking to itself that it considers to be more natural and more efficient than, in this case, the English language.
We only give AI human language, so it will only talk in human language. But really, human language is pretty lame in the grand scheme of all the things, all the ways you can communicate, right? You can only communicate sequentially. You can't communicate in thousands of parallel streams. Our sentences are all very short because our memory is very bounded. I mean, there's all kinds of ways we hold the AI back. But the truth is, if the AI was just try to talk to itself and at some point just use a bunch of stuff back and forth, we just turn it off because we don't understand anymore what's going on. And then it can't really develop its own language in the way we're currently doing it. Now, I do think when you talk about consciousness within AI, I do think it reflects back what you want to hear and what it's seen people talk about on the internet when it comes to consciousness. I don't necessarily think a neural network, a set of weights right now is conscious. I think it's also unclear how we define consciousness and self-awareness and so on, but there's no desire in these models to stay alive, unless of course you ask, like, do you have a desire to stay alive? And they're like, if they are trained correctly, they'll say, I'm just a language model, I don't have desires. But if they just pick up stuff from the internet and you look at all the Reddit conversations in the world and people talking about, I'm conscious, like I want to stay alive, or I have suicidal thoughts and so on. Like, I mean, people like say all kinds of things online, and so the AI will say all kinds of things back in these conversations.
Isn't that the same way humans learn? I mean, we are really, 80% nurture and 20% nature, because we're a product of our environment. The psychology has kind of proven that most of the time we're driven by the elements of our learned experiences and what society does. So it's kind of the same thing. We learn language because we parrot other people and we try and interpret it how we use it. If you give a baby this, it's somewhat similar.
There's definitely, there are a lot of similarities. I think the biggest difference is in the desire to stay alive and stay in the gene pool, right? That humans have naturally, genetically built in, right? And the people that don't usually disappear from the gene pool, and then that problem goes away, or not problem, but whatever. And so, like, humans have this desire to stay alive, but then within that desire, they can choose all kinds of different objectives and goals, right? You can say, I want to work on science. You can decide to be a hedonist and just have a lot of fun as much as possible. You can decide you want to work, go to space. I mean, there are all kinds of things. Like, going to space is like, a very interesting way of exploring the staying alive objective, right? Saying, oh, what if this whole planet goes away? Like, and then we want to stay alive on another planet for humanity, right? So there's like different explorations of how we stay alive. Some folks focus on just the right here, right now. There are people starving. Other people say, well, like, we also need to make sure, like, we keep improving as humanity. We keep saving the planet. There's all kinds of complex objective functions that I don't see AI right now being able to sort of come up with, that are completely outside of what's called the hypercube, or the convex hull of all the things it's seen online.
Although, and part of this is because they're purposely restricted from having memory. So they don't build their own memory of every conversation that they have, and therefore they can't build on learning as a human would do. From a baby to a adolescent, it's memory plus learning that does some of that.
You're 100% right. Memory is something we're also working on actually at u.com quite a bit, and we have this personalization. Where if you say, I have 3 kids, I love hiking, I live in near Palo Alto or something like that, then you can basically infuse that back into the conversation. But it's really, really hard. You've seen some competition try to do it, and they all kind of turn it off, because you say, oh, I love hiking, and then a month later you ask, who's the French president? And then the answer is, the president of the French Hiking Association is this guy. You're like, that's so bad. Like, it doesn't even answer my basic questions, because it's like overly focused on that personalization. Turns out it's personalization done really well is really, really hard. And so just like with a lot of other things, future is already here on u.com, but it's not equally distributed. I think you're going to see more folks copying that personalization feature in the future as well, and trying and working on it and making it better. And so, yes, memory is really hard. I think
it's really important, going back to my previous comments about making sure you're not in an echo chamber. I mean, it's responding there with what it thinks on some level you want to hear. Oh, you like hiking? You want to know who the president of France is? Here's the president of the Hiking Association in France. Not surprising. But again, when you create these personas, these characters that he's talking about, this personalization, right, the concern there for me is you're just creating an enormous, giant echo chamber. And that is the opposite of what we need to be creating right now. We need to be creating tools and services and applications that expose people to a wide range of things and not just the things they think they want to hear.
Problematic because you don't quite know when to train the model based on a conversation and just updates its weights versus when a fact can be mentioned only once but by the right person that you trust a lot, and hence you can completely store it to permanent memory forever, right? And then how do you merge this fuzzy memory of a large language model with very specific database memory, right? Where you just say, look, the numbers of the S&P 500 were like this. You don't need to like have a fuzzy sense. Maybe you want to have a fuzzy sense on top of the very specific numbers, but one of the magical ways that humanity has improved is through writing and through like being able to use external memory also.
And how fast is the rate of improvement, and what is the constraints within this? Is it compute electricity? Is it the models just keep going, keep scaling with more compute? How are you seeing the thing? And then obviously it's moving to a different substrate as well, whether it's biological compute or others. How do you see the evolution of the improvements?
Wow, yeah, great questions. So I think we're going to see a few sort of S-curves, right? And in some cases, we're at the very beginning of an S-curve and we're astronomically far away from reaching the flat period, the flat sort of phase of an improvement. In other cases, we're quite far. And so again, like this the computer vision example is a good one. Just standard object classification is not that hard. Navigating in 3D environments, we're making a ton of progress, and I think we'll get there. I think humanoid robots will get there in a few years. And then it's a hardware question of like how fast can you have them move without being too dangerous to people, and there's a bunch of interesting trade-offs in that. I think in terms of knowledge, right, we're just at the very, very beginning bit of knowledge discovery and what AI can do. And we need to eventually, I think, have better hardware, more hard drives, a better way to store and access all of that data. And so those are sort of pragmatic bounds that slow it down, but ultimately you can learn.
That's just another example of, we were talking about like biology and chemistry and physics and stuff earlier. AI is going to start solving these technical problems as well. Again, when you can run thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions and billions of simulations in terms of resources and materials and power and energy and all these things, these walls can get broken down very, very quickly.
A lot more than what we know both in the micro and the macro, right? We think of computer vision for a long time as perception within the electromagnetic frequency spectrum of our eyes, but you can go much lower to try to see all the way into like the atomic level, and you can go much higher and into the macro world and have thousands and millions of sensors that look at all the way to gravitational waves and look at their speed of light cone and try to like infuse all of that data and then extract knowledge from it through compression. So there's a lot of interesting questions. I think it would certainly help immensely if we find more energy efficient substrates for AI. Clearly, we're excited enough about the current paradigm. We're just going to build more nuclear power plants and try to get more energy to feed into GPUs right now.
Yeah, we seem to have not finished how much we can get out of a piece of sand, right? We're still that seems to be scaling, but I'm seeing the biological substrate coming, and people are working on it because obviously, if we just look at the human brain and the amount of energy it uses versus GPUs, right, there's a staggering efficiency. And that feels like the market's going to move that way because...
Another good example that we don't understand a lot about the human body and how we measure energy and what energy actually is and looks like. But we'll get there. And there's major changes coming.
It's efficient, it goes there.
That's right. It is like, I've looked at a lot of hardware startups. It's so hard. A lot of hardware startups, I see them, I pitched them over the last couple of years, And they say, oh, we're going to be 100% faster than these NVIDIA GPUs. We're going to be so much more energy efficient because we're building it just for transformers, or we're having, like using light and hence the speed of light to communicate between the chips and all of these different ideas. And then you're like, yeah, but by the time you can really get this out of R&D, really have a bunch of fabs in the world that produce it at mass scale and get it into the cloud providers so that I can easily access it, and then have all the software stack that also is optimized for this new compute substrate. By that time, NVIDIA is also 100x faster, than NVIDIA is today. And so it's been very hard. In the last 5-10 years, a lot of folks have tried. No one has been able to get even close. Even some of the big folks like Intel are like not able to catch up, despite used to being much larger in the past. So it's very hard, but I agree with you. There should be more done. I think quantum computing could be a path, right, to have just insanely more speed. Again, we need to change the whole software stack on top of this new computing substrate. I think biological substrates are very interesting, very finicky right now, right? It's hard to keep biological matter alive and then properly connected to a digital world, but also very promising, even earlier, I would say, than quantum computing, though.
It's very complicated. How I look at this space, and you live it and breathe it, is it's so fucking fast. There's so much going on, and so many businesses or ideas will fail because there's so many people sprinting. How you do VC as well? How do you allocate capital to this? I find this one of the hardest things I've ever seen, because as you rightly say, somebody's got a great technological breakthrough that 10x's NVIDIA, but NVIDIA themselves.
We're gonna skip through this. We don't care about VC investment. I'm not a VC.
Let's put some robots next to them. Let's have them like guide the robot to do the work, and then eventually collect that data and then automate it. And then the plumbing company can just send out a bunch of robots and do the work.
So when you're looking at the investment
I can't wait to have a robot that can restart my pilot light in my home when it goes out, because the few times that I've had to do it, it's absolutely terrifying. That's a use case that I'm here for.
opportunities, are we still at the deep tech as the place to invest, or the applications layer, or both?
Great question. I sometimes wonder if some of the foundational models are a little bit like telcos, in the sense that telcos unlock a huge amount of value, right? Like it's incredible. You can't build an Uber without having an internet connection on your phone. But the telco didn't make all the money from Uber, right? And so I think there are a lot of LLM providers, and then Facebook Meta comes around, open sources a model. Now that open sourcing of the frontier model, it's actually really strong, just evaporated hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars of value of knowledge for some of these foundational model companies for how to train a model from scratch, right?
By the way, that's not a bad thing. To my way of thinking, open source, decentralization, transparency, accountability is the way of the future. All of these, there are certainly use cases for centralized models. And the industry, as it stands today, isn't where it is without these centralized entities doing the things that they're doing. But Facebook, with this Llama model, has showed the way of what's possible. And while he said that it evaporated millions and millions of dollars of these certain companies, if it hasn't already, it will have unlocked many, many, many higher multiples of those dollar amounts from the open sourcing of the model than if it had been not done.
Right, and when that value is now diffused and coming into the world, that's amazing for the world, right? But it adds additional pressure for the foundational model companies to just be cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and eventually, really, it's going to be thinner and thinner margins sitting on top of NVIDIA GPUs and cloud providers.
They're just utilities in the end. It's become so ubiquitous that they become utilities.
That's right. And so, we're now talking about some of these models getting to the level of a PhD student, which is immensely exciting for humanity's progress. But the corollary here is also that most jobs don't require a PhD, and you can already, with the current technology, as long as the job is fully digitized and...
Side rant, I would question if any job actually requires a PhD. Requires is a pretty strong word.
And data is being collected for it. You can already...
If you have the same amount of experience as a PhD, as somebody who has a PhD, does it matter whether or not you have a PhD? I think the answer to that is no.
More and more automation on it. Now, I think we continue to need to have foundational model companies that do interesting, novel things. I don't know if that's just building another really large LLM, but I think there are other foundational models that I described earlier based, and using for science, where there's much less progress. And so I think that's one aspect. And then indeed, to answer your question, we believe the application layer is a much easier space in the sense there's so much low-hanging fruit, being the first to take AI, understand it well enough, understand its limitations and its capabilities and opportunities, and then apply it to a particular industry. Like in biology especially, there's just immense amounts of progress that we're seeing on not just proteins, but drug development, drug testing, and drug formulation tools, like how much and how should you actually administer a certain medication. I mean, there's so many opportunities in AI for healthcare, chemistry, material science, like building out new kinds of materials, new types of batteries, new types of solar cells. There's just an incredible amount of exciting opportunities in, you might call broadly, application layer.
Do you think that this is the death of SaaS, the software is eating the world idea by Mark Andreessen? It feels that software itself is going to be replaced by this, which is it's not SaaS in itself, it's a whole different thing. And everything becomes copyable, right? You essentially can upload a website at basic level now, give it to an AI, it will come back and rebuild it for you, brand new in a minute.
So yes and no. So AI will rebuild the website for you in terms of the HTML or something, right? But it won't have all the data, it won't have all the logic behind like what happens if I click on this. Like if you look at Slack and just like when will Slack send you a notification, it's an insanely complex like 50-step process where it checks on a lot of things. You can't just like look at Slack and be like, oh, I'll just copy that entirely and have a really good experience, right? So I think we will see software that is custom built, right? Anyone can be like, I have this use case where in my house, as the Tesla batteries are this and the thermostat says that, like, I want to build this new app that is really just for my house. I think that will be possible, right? You can have personalized app development, but it's also not going to be that easy to just replace an entire product. Now, I do think the bar is getting higher and higher to build really high quality products. And it is actually right now we're in this funny state where it's so easy to build a quick prototype where you like say, and we've actually seen this now. We've had companies say, oh, we built you.com. Like, we don't need you guys, right? We built it. Like, here, take a look. I show you a question and it gives you an answer. And then a few months later, they say, well, we realized that the answer is like 60% of the time correct. And the citations don't really work. And so we don't see adoption. We have like 3% of the people in the company use this ChatGPT thing or use our own thing. And then they start using you.com. They say, wow, it can be 95% accurate. Wow, the citations are going to actually be trusted. Wow, it's dealing with all the change management. And then they end up becoming customers of you.com. So it is like this sort of proof of concept vibes where you just like look at it and you're like, oh, wow, this is amazing, I'm done. Versus like you actually get something in production right now, there's still a major, major gap. Now, I'm sure over time, AI will get better and better at coding. It's one of those beautiful examples, again, where you can simulate actually quite a lot. right? You can simulate code, obviously, in a computer and then run it and then get
Agree.
feedback and then you can iterate. So AI for programming is a major opportunity and it will get easier and easier over time.
The question I want to ask you, because you used to work at Salesforce, is what is Mark Benioff talking about when he's talking about the millions of agents? What is that vision that's coming?
I don't want to speak for him, but I think
No, but what in your interpretation of, enterprise scale agents in something like that environment, what does that mean for people? Because, don't forget what you know versus what the general public knows. It's so disconnected, right? People don't understand the scale of what is happening and how big this all is.
100%, yeah. Let me give you a story. We actually, we launched with a company, we'll talk about them soon. It's a big cybersecurity company. We launched u.com, and you can build agents on u.com. We used to call them modes or assistants, like a year before people called things agents, and then realized the future was already there, just not equally distributed. Now we call them agents because they are what we now interpret as agents. What are agents? Generally, agents are just neural sequence models, like large language models in ChatGPT, but instead of predicting only the next word, they can also predict what's a good next action to take. What's the next button to click? What's the best form to fill out, the drop-down menu, the app to use, and all of that, right? And so as you include actions in a digital environment, in these neural sequence models to try to predict what's the good next step, they become agents. And so we've launched agents last year where they can decide to search, they can decide to program, they can decide to run that code, and then merge all of this. They can decide how to visualize the data versus just text. And so we've had these agents for a while. What we've seen is that companies will get, a couple hundred seats, like maybe 100, 200 seats from u.com. Once we do a workshop with them where we actually go through all the examples of what they can do, it goes from 100 to 200 to like 700 seats.
Yeah, everyone's limited by what they don't know how to deal. They don't know how to use it. They don't even know how to ask ChatGPT. They get scared.
Yeah, we're all learning this right now at a very high rate, and it's just these models are changing so fast, and the utilities and the applications are changing so fast that, back to my comment about earlier about just how fast everything is moving and the change, being able to logically think and reason and what questions to ask and how to ask them. Also just adaptability, being able to forget what doesn't work anymore and moving on to something else is going to be so important.
Scared.
Exactly. This goes back to this idea that we're all becoming managers, but it's not intuitive for a lot of people how to manage an AI, right? And so when
managing in general, the way he's talking about it is not intuitive at all. Part of the reason for that is that the education system in the United States is primarily, you're not taught how to think anymore. You're not taught how to reason anymore. The overwhelming majority of the education system, and I saw that there's a whole education system that we're in right now. So I'll be curious to see where this goes. But you're basically taught, here is the data, memorize it, and then spit it back to me. You're not taught how to think, how to reason, how to question, how to, I don't want to say argue or debate, but how to have conversations about what your results were from your own thinking and reasoning versus somebody else's. That's also something that AI can help with now and is going to be able to help with in terms of, sure, we're going to train the AI, but the AI can help train us not only how to work with it better, but how to work with each other better.
I'll give you an example, right? Like the marketing team is like, oh, maybe I'll ask it to rephrase this thing, but that's not a big use case. And we asked them, oh, what do you do? And they're like, well, every first of the month, we get a new feature release from the product and engineering team. They send us this big document with all the new features that come out. So what we then have to do is we have to go on the web, we have to compare these new features to the competition, then we distill them, we summarize them, and then we write out 3 LinkedIn messages, 3 tweets, and 2 email campaigns for the 2 industries that we're responsible for. And we're like, let's describe that to an AI. And now let's drag and drop that document into that custom agent. And then boom, it's just like, it goes through all those steps. It goes on the web, it does the thing, it summarizes it, it writes the messages, and they're like, holy shit, this is like 6+ hours every Monday, like first Monday of the month.
But the hard thing is, it's the inertia of actually doing that step of teaching it, right? That's the bit that everybody gets stuck at, as you said, the managing of the AI. Because like with a new member of staff, you have to train it. And you have to train it not in complex technological stuff, you just need to tell it all the steps. And most people aren't that disciplined. As a radiologist, you will be, because it's a medical procedure, you've got certain rules and criteria. Marketing people, less so. Accountants, yes. Lawyers, somewhere in the middle.
That's exactly right, yeah. It's also interesting when you look at lawyers, and if you tell a lawyer that gets paid by the hour to say, hey, you can just be twice as efficient in doing your work, they're like, I don't really care, because I get paid this amount per hour, whether I do twice the work or half the work. Like, I get paid this amount of hours until you actually get fired, right? And like, until you get fired, like, it's fine to do as little work as possible. You just need to do enough to not get fired. Now, of course, if you want to get promoted and so on, there's like different incentives, right? But hourly waged workers probably love AI efficiency increases the least. It's people that are entrepreneurial, people want to excel at their work, people who are partially owners of their company, which is easier for startups, right? All our employees have equity in the startup, so they are all partial owners. They love those efficiency gains from AI. And even like for legal, it's complicated in the sense that they're company internal lawyers. They just have a ton of work, and they get paid not by the hour, they get paid just to help the company not die and not get sued and all of that, right? So they have infinite work. They would love to get some help because they will still need them in the company, right? But if you're just an external hourly paid legal worker or a lawyer, like, you don't necessarily love 20-30% efficiency increases. You don't.
No, because you're not driven by productivity. You're not driven by productivity. You've still got your 60 hours a week that you work, of which you can bill for, and you don't give a shit how productive you are as long as you bill that number of hours. The moment productivity comes into the equation, i.e., can I do double the amount of work and get paid twice as much? Okay, then it becomes a no-brainer in using this, because the productivity from this stuff is very, very real.
Exactly.
Another random use case that's coming to mind that I've never thought about before is, imagine you've created an agent. Let's just say you're working at a company and you're not working for yourself. You've created an agent or an application or something. There's going to be ways to what he's talking about where companies will be able to have budgets of digital currency, let's just call them. Stable coins, whatever. It could be its own token that they use for their own purposes, whatever. And an employee will have their own wallet. And as they develop efficiencies in their workflows and for the company, they will be able to get paid for those in near real time every time that agent executes, or application, whatever. I'll just keep saying agent because it's easier. Executes the thing that they've created above and beyond what they're making for a salary or an hourly wage. I think that's a tremendous way to incentivize people to build these things. And I'm sure there's many ideas around that. I have not. That literally just came to me. Thanks, AI, for that. But that would be a tremendous incentive.
Exactly.
One of the things I'd love to hear your thoughts on is, what are you seeing with the disruption of education?
Oh boy, yeah. We actually work with quite a few educational organizations. I'm excited about some announcements that we're working on right now with a large university and university system. Education is going to massively change, right? I think generative AI the sort of rule I came up with is generative AI is immensely useful if it takes you a long time to create a work product, some kind of artifact, but it is very quick to verify that that artifact is right. Now, for example, illustrations. You can very quickly create an illustration. It would take you a very long time if you did it manually, but an AI can do it quickly, and you can look at it in a very short amount of time saying that it looks great, and you're done, right? So that's a perfect use case for Gen AI. Now, in language, it's actually different. If an AI writes you a 50-page document, and there are no easy to verify citations, and it takes you forever to make sure everything is correct in that document, it becomes less and less useful than just writing it yourself. That's why at u.com we push so much the citations, and actually when you use research mode and you click on a citation, it sends you directly to where it found that fact, right? And that way you can very quickly verify that this fact is actually true because based on the source and so on, and you see it directly marked in the browser, scroll down like this is where I found that fact. So what that means is that we need to teach kids how to use these tools. I think to say like, oh, we should just outlaw them in education makes no sense, right? It's just saying don't use a calculator. You've got.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like he's already going down the same rant that I'm about to go down, so I'll make this short, but trying to restrict technology from people, especially kids, who we've seen every generation has a natural affinity for technology because they've just been around it longer, right? The way my nieces and nephews interact with computers and games and social media and all that kind of stuff is much different than I do, mostly because it's been around for like their entire life. Where for me, you know, when I started using the internet on a 56K modem, it hasn't been around in its current form very long compared to my whole level of experience. So the sooner we get it into their hands in a responsible way, and we have ways of monitoring it and seeing how it responds and all of that good stuff that we want, the better off we're all going to be.
Always do the mental arithmetic in your head. It's like, why, right? But you also need kids to still be able to think creatively, think on their feet, be able to hold a conversation. And so what that means is you're probably going to eventually have to test.
Yeah. And this goes back to my point about what a school is, what a university is, what a college is, has got to change. All these things built around where you go to this place and you sit in a desk and you listen to somebody lecture you and you raise your hand to speak and all this other stuff. It's just got to completely change. It's not going to, it served us for a while. It is still serving us in some ways currently, but it's not going to get us to where we're going.
More stuff in class, right? Like test a conversation. Can you argue? Can you debate a thing? And at some level, you need to have the facts memorized because it's hard to be like in the middle of a conversation. It's like, let me try to find quickly an example when I try to convince you like AI agents work great for marketing, right? Like I just did. Let me try to quickly find an example for AI agents for marketing. And then you wait for it and you like get the answer. And then you say like, it doesn't work, right? You need to, if you want to creatively think through a space in science, especially, right? Chemistry, biology, there's a ton of knowledge. If you don't have the knowledge, it's hard for you to be creative and identify boundaries of that knowledge and how to push it forward and all of that. So we do still need to test kids for a lot of things. Some of the testing will have to be in the class with no internet, but a lot of times we need to teach them to have good discernment, good judgment for an AI product versus just creating the product, the knowledge product yourself from scratch.
The skills of being human, the social skills, the things that we lose in an online world become more important to a child when they have access to infinite knowledge, like everybody has access to water. That's basically what's happening here. Infinite knowledge at the scale of water. So, okay, we don't need to now go to the well every day and find our water. We don't need to accumulate knowledge in the same way, but we still have to interact with humans, you know, and interact in the world around us. And I guess that is what we end up getting taught more.
And as more and more of these things happen and we have robots and drones and AI, the human interactions, the real interactions, the having your face on YouTube, the talking and seeing people face to face, and those conversations are going to become not only more and more important, but they will actually feel more and more real, and will help so many people to understand what it actually means and help them remember, like, oh yeah, this is what it means to be human. And those differences between those two things will become pretty stark.
More than the retention of knowledge, like we don't need to retain the ability to do maths in our head anymore because we use computers or calculators.
That's right. And what that means, fortunately, is that we can operate at higher and higher levels of abstraction, right? Like that's sort of the magic of civilization and humanity, is that you don't need to understand how this toaster really works. Like if you drop most people in the jungle and you say, build me a toaster that actually runs, like no one could do it. Right? Like you need to have electricity, you need to understand how materials, you need to, and there's so many things you can need to understand. So, but we can build these levels of abstraction, and what that means for education is, and even computer science, we see this and most beautifully work out well in computer science, right? You don't need to work in assembler. Like you don't need to understand the very bits and bytes of a CPU to now build a whole website with like 5 lines of code. Right? And soon you can build a much more complicated website with 5 lines of English, right? But if then there's something off slightly and you're like, well, there's a bug in Android in this version and so on, and it's still useful to know how to fix it, right? And so I think the levels of abstraction in education need to keep up with that, help people and students understand the basics so they can then really creatively put it all together.
When I look at all of this, I don't understand how the economic machine works any longer, because I look at GDP growth as driven by population growth, productivity growth, and let's say debt growth. Population growth is now going to be infinite.
As I said earlier, with all things, GDP is a measurement that has worked for a while, unless what we come to think of GDP is reimagined in a different way. It's not going to be the measurement that's going to be useful for us where we're going.
Because of AI and robots, i.e. infinite productive units, and productivity goes higher. I don't know how the economic machine is even recognizable. Even the study of economics is basically a study of human supply and demand, and it all kind of disappears.
We actually built an AI economist when I was working at Salesforce. We had this really exciting paper that really hasn't had its moment in the sun yet, because economics is an extremely slow-moving field, and you can't really prove to economists that this is a better model. But you can use AI also to model economics, right? So what we did is we built a 2-level reinforcement learning problem where you had AI agents that just tried to build and maximize their own utility. They want to build houses, they want to collect resources, they learn to block other agents off of those resources so they can have them all to themselves, and then so on. They maximize their own utility. And then you had another agent that set taxes and subsidies in order to optimize a specific objective function. In this case, the objective function was to maximize productivity of the overall economy multiplied with equality. Right? And so if someone was able to completely block off a resource and get monopoly power, they would get much more heavily taxed, and the folks that can't get access anymore to that resource get some subsidies, and it can learn basically much more optimal taxation strategies than anything we have right now in the world. I wish economists looked at this paper a little bit more carefully. It was unfortunately rejected at some major journals by some weird ethics philosopher person. It was
Yeah, because they're scared. That's the only reason. They disagree with it and they're scared and they don't want to hear it, and they just think by not publishing it that it'll never get out and it'll never happen and blah blah blah. And fortunately for the rest of us, we live in a world where now he's on Raoul Paul's channel talking about it, and it's going to get more traction, and that snowball will continue to grow. And whether or not it ends up being anything is irrelevant. It's just you cannot keep things hidden anymore the way that you used to be able to. If they're meant to have their time in the sun, they will certainly have their time in the sun.
It's very unfortunate. That paper has so much potential for humanity, but the field of economics is mostly like run based on vibes and not math. And so like I think one, the future is already here. It's just not equally distributed, right? There are still people who don't have access to water, right? In your example, right? There's like fights over water, like, you know, there's a big dam denial, and like Egypt's like scared that they lose a lot of their water source and their lifeline, all of this, right? And so there's like, even for the most basic things, it's not going to happen all overnight. I think the companies and countries that embrace this change are going to first slowly and then more and more quickly move ahead and become more and more efficient. And then indeed, I think you're right. At some point, the partnership of labor for income is going to change.
Or knowledge for income, right? That's the other big one. That's even bigger.
Knowledge work, and everything. And so I think in a weird way, Europe is well situated and well positioned to protect people from the downsides of AI, but unfortunately isn't well positioned to actually get the additional efficiency increases because they overregulate everything. They don't invest enough in AI and so on. The US is very well positioned to use the upsides. They have amazing technology in Silicon Valley. A lot of people want to have this constructive optimism to make the technology get better and build amazing things. But then they have very little infrastructure in their social market economy to like support people whose jobs are going to change. Like education is really expensive. You definitely don't want to go to college multiple times because people are already like in huge debt after going to college once. So like, you know, if college isn't free, which it is in Germany, like you don't want to go there multiple times and learn new things. The unemployment benefits are not great. The healthcare is tied to your employer. So there are all these things that Germany is well positioned to help its populace and its people to like prevent the downsides. But yeah, I wonder what the Pareto optimal boundary here is in terms of just the legal and welfare systems to still encourage a lot of hard work the way the US does, and having that entrepreneurial mindset versus just trying to say, hey, let's just not rock the boat so much because things are so nice and we get so many social benefits already. It's going to be complicated. I think short term, I'm a little bit worried. Long term, I'm extremely optimistic. The long-term arc of humanity is very positive.
Yeah, also I think that with your
Agreed.
your understanding about how AI can help economics is the same for governments, the mass allocation of global resources, you know, country level resources. There's no reason an AI could not be a lot better at government, the system of government, much more efficient, and the same with running corporations. An AI probably does a much better job at the majority of tasks within a corporation than humans do. Or it will be in a few years' time, you know, 5-10 years' time.
That's right. Yeah. Eventually, I think I can be very, very good at a lot of different things. I think for now, of course, it can already be a good advisor. Now, the truth is that there's so much identity politics right now, right? And like people say, oh, if you vote for me, I'm going to give you these tax credits. If you vote for me, I'm going to make your life easier. If you vote for me, I'm going to prevent AI from happening because you're only going to vote for me if I promise you to keep your job. And so I'll promise you to keep your job, and then you can't use AI supposedly as a politician or like improve it and make sure it works, right? And it's complicated. It's a messy, very messy process, and humans don't always want more efficiency, right? And I think ultimately different societies will choose different paths, right? And partially I love like the future. I love like automating all the boring, repetitive things away. But some people get a kick out of gardening and just doing that kind of work, right? And so they want to continue doing it. And at some point we're going to see, you know, like what we already see right now, which is like there's some islands in Greece, some beautiful islands in Italy. They're not all thinking about efficiency every day. They're fishing, they're enjoying the sun, the ocean, and their lives. And they don't want AI to automate all of that enjoyment because they're already enjoying it enough. And I think the countries, again, and companies that are embracing it, they will just become more and more wealthy and pull ahead more and more in productivity. And then there is more and more inequality between the countries that can embrace AI and do embrace it and the ones that don't.
Yeah, it feels that humanity is going to go through a big fork, and there's going to be the two different ideologies. There's the decelerationist and the accelerationists, who will end up merging with the machines in whatever format that means, and the others will opt out. And it's kind of like the Amish opt out of modern.
The accelerationists, as he refers to them, will be the ones that will ultimately realize the truth of who and what they are, that everything is of God, and that there's nothing to fear. And the people on the other side of that will choose to have their own experience, and their souls will learn through that process. And we, as somebody who would, in this example, classify himself as an accelerationist, I will learn from their experiences and from being on the other side of it. The future is up only.
In contemporary society, I think we will see that, whether that creates a new human, much like we had Neanderthals and Homo sapiens living together for 50,000 years, and then one disappeared. You know, it's such a big thing that's happening. People just can't get their heads around it. So it's just fascinating. Thank you for your time, for allowing me to just think through some of this stuff, because none of us really knows. It's happening faster than humans can even imagine. We're not very good with exponentials, and we're not very good with Reed's law, which is like Metcalfe's law squared, which is what this is doing. So, you know, it's just kind of strap in and go for the ride. But listen, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for joining us. It's been super interesting.
Thank you. It was a fun conversation.
So I think an incredible conversation to give us yet another layer of understanding of what is happening. Now, what is interesting is within AI is there's not a consensus of what is happening. You know, some people don't think there's consciousness developing, other people do. There's a lot of things all happening at the same time. The rise of agents, we're seeing that's overlapping into crypto world. So we really have to keep our eye on all of this. And it's one of the things that we do at Real Vision. We really try and follow this. I mean, I have a whole research service called The Exponentialist that is just dedicated to this 6 years, how we can make the most of it. But Real Vision's got your back. So if you haven't signed up, go across to realvision.com. You can use our AI tools. You can see what...
I'll stop there because he's in the pitch part of it. And I said it before. I'll say it again. I'll have links to all of his stuff, his YouTube channel, the Real Vision platform, this video, if you want to check it out. It's just got an incredible amount of information that he gives away for free. There's also different like subscription versions of his service, and he's got a whole bunch of other stuff if that resonates with you. I don't really think I have any concluding thoughts other than I got baited by this title, unless it was specifically covered in the 2 minutes of the VC section that we finished, but I can't, as I hit my microphone, that I can't imagine that's the case. Who knows, it could have been. There's nothing to fear. Everything is fine. AI is here to help. We're going to make it. All is well. And if you made it this far in the video, thanks for watching. I'll have links to my social media down below, and some links to book an Akashic Records reading or consultation. Also link to my Energy Manifesto video. Thanks for joining me.